Good evening, and welcome to the regular meeting of the Acting President and Board of Trustees of the Village of Burr Ridge. Our first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Could you all stand, please, and recite the Pledge of Allegiance with me? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Motto.
Here.
Trustee Cabeza.
Here.
Trustee Mattal. Here. Trustee Snyder.
Here.
Trustee Schiappa.
Here.
Trustee Francis.
Here. Thank you. So tonight, our first order of business, we have a special recognition, special opportunity to recognize, we're privileged to recognize some heroic efforts by our police force, our fine officers, that they have exhibited while performing their regular duties serving our residents. We're blessed here in this village with an exceptional police force. The members of the police force are dedicated to the safety and well-being of our residents and non-residents. Chief Madden, if you please.
Thank you. Good evening. It is my honor tonight to recognize the performance of several members of the Burr Ridge Police Department. The actions of these officers recognized tonight save lives. Their efforts bring praise to the entire police department and are an excellent example of the qualities of a Burr Ridge police officer. As you'll hear in the summary, these awards were delayed a little bit. These incidents occurred last year. We didn't have a life-saving award, but we still recognize these actions through other departmental awards. Unfortunately, they occurred more frequently, and it rose to the level for us to create a separate award, a life-saving award. So here we are tonight. Deputy Chief Loftus is going to provide you with a summary of each of the incidents, and then we'll call the officers up.
I have Officers Duralamic, Watson, and Gutierrez come forward, please. On January 16th, 2019, Officers Kyle Duralamic, Brandon Watson, and Brian Gutierrez responded to Lifetime Fitness for a subject that collapsed and was unconscious and not breathing. Upon arrival, Officer Watson began performing CPR, while Officers Duralamic and Gutierrez attached an AED and administered a shock as advised. The officers continued CPR until the arrival of paramedics, who found the victim had regained a pulse. Officers Duralamic, Watson, and Gutierrez. May I please have Officer Timothy Lesniak come forward. On January 12th, 2018, Officer Timothy Lesniak investigated a disabled vehicle off of County Line Road. He found the rear seat passenger was suffering from an overdose of heroin. Officer Lesniak administered 2 doses of naloxone or Narcan. After the second dose, the subject regained consciousness and was taken to the hospital. Officer Tim Lesniak. May I have Officer Weeks, please? On September 23rd, 2018, Officer Lucas Weeks responded to Brookdale Assisted Living, where he found a victim unconscious and not breathing. Officer Weeks attached an AED to the subject and administered a shock as advised. He continued with CPR until the arrival of paramedics who found the victim had regained a pulse. Officer Lucas Weeks. Officer Thomas McNabb could not be with us tonight. But on January 6, 2018, Officer McNabb responded to a reported heroin overdose. He found the victim unconscious and not breathing. Officer McNabb administered 2 doses of naloxone or Narcan, and after the second dose, the victim started breathing again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, last weekend, not this most recent, but a week ago, we had 2 more incidents of overdoses, 2 separate incidents by 1 officer in both incidents. So you'll be seeing him in the near future, but they were both saves. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. Our next agenda item are residents' comments. If you're a resident of the Village of Burr Ridge and you wish to speak on a issue or topic of your own, you may come to the podium, and we ask that you limit your comments to 5 minutes. That's one of our rules, please. So anyone wish to speak tonight in the residents' comments section? Mr. Morton.
My name's Richard Morton, Lake Club. I've been a resident here since 1989. A couple of things tonight I'd like to talk about. One is I'm grateful the election is over, and the outcome ensures we won't have to have another appointed trustee. I think that's important for democracy. There are about 12 subdivisions in Lakeridge and Burr Ridge that receive, in my opinion, unfair treatment under the current road program and how we were made part of Burr Ridge. Our developer back in 1988 made a deal with the village board whereby the streets within Lake Ridge Club are private streets. But we are also required to allow public entrance and exit from those streets. So we are burdened with 100% of the cost of repairing the roads, replacing the roads, snow removal, ice abatement, et cetera, as are approximately 11 other subdivisions. And I'm not sure how that concept came to be where the village would allow subdivisions to come in where the owners of the homes were made responsible for the roadway costs. And it really becomes an unequal burden because tax revenues that are collected from these 12 subdivisions are based on the same rate as all the other homes in Burr Ridge. Now, Mr. Pollack, a little bit ago, somewhere around November or October, when he was attempting to pull together the road budget for 2019, identified a couple of revenue streams for a more permanent roadway replacement budget. And one of the items he proposed was implementing a special service area for the secondary roads when they require replacement. And that resonated with me as being a possible way to restore fairness to all Burr Ridge residents, to start thinking of special service areas when secondary roads require replacement. And our tax dollars would then be more equally divided amongst all of us. So that's my 2 cents on roadway costs for tonight. I don't expect any action. It's just I wanted you to hear my opinion and to consider it moving forward. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the data that we've seen come out of the EPA testing since the seal order was put in place and the importance of the seal order. Prior to the seal order, based on distance and based on 38 days of EPA testing, if I was Mr. Snyder, living about 0.7 of a mile away from Sterigenics, my cancer rate would have been nearly 2,000 in a million. After the seal order was put in place and the 6 days of testing post-seal order, my chance of developing or the risk of developing cancer would have plummeted to just 638. A pretty remarkable difference in a fairly short period of time since since the EPA only tested for about 6 or 7 days, well, I guess it was more like 10 days post seal order. So it's important that, one, we recognize there's a very definite causation to activity at Sterigenics and the concentrations of ethylene oxide in our community. And that leads me to my next area of concern, and that is the IDPH cancer study was released last week. And it showed that there were elevated cancers, and it showed that there were cancers that were below the expected norm. But there were some significant numbers, and frankly, I was surprised that they were that high, because the population as a whole in America, according to the U.S. Census, we move about 11.2% of the population moves each and every year. So over the 20 years of the study, the population affected by ethylene oxide would have completely turned over more than 2 times. So people that had been exposed for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, moved away before cancer was detected in their body. And unfortunately, the cancer registries do a really, really crummy job of tracking that problem. So one of the things that I'd really like this village to do, and how they do it, I don't know, but to advocate for changes in the cancer registry, to do better tracking of people that lived in an area, moved to another area where the diagnosis was then made, so we can track it back. And it's going to take legislative work throughout the country, but I'd like to see Burr Ridge be a leader in that area. The IDPH also made a few comments that I think were really erroneous and injurious to the whole goal. One was they made a rather casual comment that exhaust from vehicles is a source of ethylene oxide, with no citation, no proof, no idea of whether that's a real factor or not a real factor. And for a body like the Illinois Department of Public Health, I really think that they misstated in that, and they ought to issue a retraction. The last comment I'm going to make about the IDPH cancer study, they made a comment when comparing the rate of breast cancer occurring in the Willowbrook study area 1, study area 2, and they had a footnote that DuPage County suffers from the highest breast cancer rates in Illinois. And that came as news to me. Perhaps I had my head in a barrel. But that's alarming on an entirely different level. And I'd really like to know, and really like to encourage IDPH to start trying to figure out why the women in DuPage County are so afflicted. That's what our tax dollars are supposed to be doing, and that's what I think this village ought to be advocating for them to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other residents who would like to make comments? Okay, seeing none. Let's move on to the consent agenda. All items listed with an asterisk on the agenda are considered routine by the village board and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a board member or a citizen so requests, in which event the item will be removed from the consent agenda and discussed further. So first, item 5A, minutes. Approval of the regular board meeting of February 25th, 2019. B, approval of the regular board meeting of March 11th, 2019. C, approval of the Board of Trustees special budget workshop meeting of March 11th, 2019. D, approval of Board of Trustees special budget workshop meeting of March 18th, 2019. E, receive and file Downtown Burr Ridge Events Planning Committee meeting of February 1st, 2019. And 5F, receive and file Veterans Memorial Committee meeting of March 27th, 2019. Under ordinances, 6C, approval of an ordinance annexing certain property to the village of Burr Ridge, 8300 and 8304 Bugie Lane. D, approval of an ordinance disconnecting certain property from the village of Burr Ridge, 11411 German Church Road. E, approval of an ordinance amending Appendix A of Chapter 7, Special Flood Hazard Areas of the Burr Ridge Municipal Code. Under Resolution 7A, adoption of a resolution updating the Village of Burr Ridge Affordable Housing Plan as mandated by the 2004 State of Illinois Affordable Housing Planning and Appeal Act. Under considerations 8D, approval of a recommendation to award contract for facility needs assessment in consolidating public works facilities to Legal Architects, Inc. of Oak Brook, Illinois, in an amount not to exceed $14,000. E, approval of a recommendation to renew the contract for 2019 for street sweeping services to Lakeshore Recycling Systems of West Chicago, Illinois, in the amount of $26,736. F, approval of recommendation to award contract for purchase of trees through the Suburban Tree Consortium in the amount not to exceed $15,260. G, approval of a recommendation to award contract for purchase of replacement vehicle for Public Works Unit 33 dump truck with plow to JX Truck Center in Bolingbrook, Illinois, in the amount of $196,468.94 for delivery after May 1st, 2019. H, approval of a recommendation to award contract for the 2019 crack sealing program to Denler, Inc. of Mokina, Illinois, in the amount not to exceed $65,000 for completion after May 1st, 2019. I, approval of recommendation to approve agreement regulating video surveillance cameras for the Neighborhood Video Surveillance Program in Devon Ridge. J, receive and file resignation letter from probationary officer Jamie Kroll. K, recommendation to hire replacement patrol officer to fill vacancy created by the resignation of Officer Jamie Kroll. L, approval of vendor list dated March 25th, 2019, in the amount of $422,858.96 for all funds, plus $185,757.30 for payroll, for a grand total of $606,616.26, which includes special expenditures of $28,846.80 for tree pruning. M, approval of vendor list dated April 8th, 2019, the amount of $122,404.98 for all funds, plus $181,314.59 for payroll, for a grand total of $303,719.57, which includes special expenditures of $48,833 for a 2019 Ford F-250. May I please have a motion for items 5A, B, C, D, E, and F, items 6C, D, and E, items 7A, items 8, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, and M.
So moved.
Second.
Karen, please take the roll.
Trustee Scalpa.
Yes.
Trustee Matal.
Yes.
Trustee Snyder.
Yes.
Trustee Paveza.
Yes.
Trustee Model.
Yes.
Trustee Francis.
Yes.
6-0.
Motion carries. Thank you. Our next item of order of business is ordinances, 6A. I'm sorry, the public hearing for the budget. Right now, we're going to go have our public hearing for our 2019-2020 budget. Start, please.
Yes, we are required by law to hold a public hearing and publish a legal notice for consideration of the annual budget. Our fiscal year runs from May 1st to April 30th of each year. We are required by law to adopt a budget prior to the end of each fiscal year, and that's typically done at the first meeting in April. Legal notice for the public hearing was published in the March 28th Suburban Life, at which time the final budget document was made available for public review. The village board has conducted several workshops and meetings to discuss the budget, and it has been revised as per the budget. At this time, I would like to ask the village president, acting president, to read the president's budget message.
Thank you. So the budget highlights: the village board reviewed staff's proposed budget in detail at the March 11th, 2019 and March 18th, 2019 workshops, and as a result, a few changes were made to the proposed budget. The budget is now in final form. The total fiscal year 1920 expenditure budget, which including transfers, amounts to $21,191,285.30. In the general fund, the fiscal year 1920 general fund budget reflects a surplus of $42,975 after $250,000 was transferred to the capital projects fund, $125,000 was transferred to the sidewalk pathway fund, and $50,000 was transferred to the equipment replacement fund. This surplus is due in large part to increases in building permit fees and sales tax growth within the village. Revenues for fiscal year 1920 general fund are estimated to be $8,976,380, which is 1.2% more than the fiscal year 1819 budget of $8,871,650. For expenditures, the fiscal year 1920 expenditures budget is $8,933,405, which is 1.0% more than the fiscal year 1819 expenditure budget of $8,846,640. In our special revenue funds, the MFT fund for fiscal year 1819 budget includes a transfer of $275,000 to the capital improvements fund to help fund the 2019 road program. This transfer represents the available funds expected to be approved by IDOT for the 2019 road program. The hotel motel tax fund this year will generate $647,419. Majority of this revenue will be used to fund the marketing plan for the Burr Ridge hotels, pay for gateway landscape maintenance, and village-sponsored programs and events. The capital projects funds, the capital improvement fund, all non-enterprise fund capital improvements are expensed out of the capital projects fund. With this in mind, revenues will come from grants and transfers from other funds and resources. The total fiscal year 1920 capital improvements budget is $1,189,225, which includes the cost of the 2019 road program in the amount of $727,035. The sidewalk pathway improvement fund for fiscal year 1920, the sidewalk pathway budget includes expenditures in the amount of $892,005 for projects and annual maintenance. It is expected that the sidewalk pathway fund will be depleted by the end of fiscal year 1920, and all future sidewalk projects will have to compete with the road program for the limited capital improvement fundings. The capital equipment replacement fund was established to account for larger vehicle and equipment replacement. This fund currently has beginning fund reserves of $386,326, and it has anticipated that $112,000 will be spent in fiscal year 1920. As indicated above, a transfer of funds from the general fund to the equipment replacement fund in the amount of $175,000 will be made this year. In the stormwater management fund, this fund was established to better account for stormwater-related revenues and expenditures. The fund currently has a beginning fund balance of $31,423, and is anticipated that it will have an ending fund balance at the end of fiscal year 19 and 20 of $5,323. $62,100 in capital projects is budgeted for fiscal year 1920. In the debt service fund, this fund includes one debt issue, and that's the police facility bonds, which has been refinanced until fiscal year 2022-2023. In the water fund, fiscal year 1920, the water fund budget shows a planned deficit in the amount of $499,830. Projected revenues from the water fund in fiscal year 1920 are $6,167,875, or 8.3% more than the fiscal year 1819 budget of $5,693,410. The fiscal year 1920 expenditure budget amounts to $6,667,705, which is 15.5% more than the fiscal year 1819 budget. A 5-year rate adjustment plan has been put in place to provide for future capital projects and bring reserves back up in this fund. In the sewer fund, fund was established to maintain the sewer system in the Cook County portion of the village. Revenues in the amount of $491,200 are projected for fiscal year 1920, with expenditures in the amount of $494,780. A A 5-year rate adjustment plan has been put in place for this fund as well. The Information Technology Fund accounts for all of costs related to delivery of information services to the internal departments of the village. For fiscal year 1920, revenues are estimated at $334,645, which is comprised primarily of transfers from the general, water, and sewer funds. Fiscal year 1920 expenditures are estimated at $372,780. The Police Pension Fund. The fiscal year 1920 Police Pension Fund revenues are estimated at $1,715,605, of which $758,505 is projected to be collected from property taxes. This amount equals the village's required contribution under state law. Total police pension disability payments equal $1,232,250. Pension disability payments include 5 police officers on permanent disability, 14 retirees, and 1 survivor spouse. Total police pension fund expenditures equals $1,305,885. Details of each budget are included in the budget document. Are there any questions? Mr. Mao?
Yes, I missed the workshop on the 18th, I apologize for that. How did we work out to come to a balanced budget? It's a balanced budget now, is that correct?
So there was approximately $199,000, $200,000 that was drawn from the general fund. The general fund is pretty much like our piggy bank. Our $800,000 in excess surplus last year went into the general fund, and we're drawing down on that.
So we're using our reserves to balance the budget, so it's not a truly balanced budget. We're using reserves to fund the
Correct.
operations. Okay.
It complies with our policies for balanced budget.
Right, with our Burridge policy, but other people have pointed out that that's not a balanced budget exactly in some definitions, so we're not quite meeting that because we're using our piggy bank.
Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Questions for the residents in the audience? Okay. Close public hearing on the residents, on the budget message. All right. Okay. Moving on to ordinances. 6A.
I apologize, I'm a little bit thrown. My computer all of a sudden gave me a different screen, and I'm not sure why. Got it, thank you. So 6A, this is the ordinance adopting, I'm sorry, to close the hearing?
Yeah, motion to close the public hearing.
Sorry.
So moved. Second.
Who seconded the motion? I'm sorry. Joe did. Thank you. Trustee Model?
Yes.
Trustee Snyder?
Yes.
Trustee Skiappa?
Yes.
Trustee Matal? Yes. Trustee Paveza?
Yes.
Trustee Francis?
Yes.
6-0.
Motion passes. Under ordinances, 6A.
This is the ordinance adopting the budget for fiscal year 2019-20 for the village of Burr Ridge, for which we just held the public hearing. If there are any questions, Finance Director Jerry Sapp is present, and I am present as well to answer any questions anyone may have.
Are there any questions on the budget in its entirety?
Just why were we not able to come up with a balanced budget? You know, I'm not a big fan of using our piggy bank for one-time expenditures and would rather see that invested in things that will generate returns in the future. And if we keep using it for one-time expenditures and filling holes, I don't think that's the best policy for the village.
I'll start, and you can add to it. So there was a list of recommendations provided by staff of cuts to come up with some $1,000 to enable us to have a true balanced budget. We reviewed each and every one of those cuts in detail with staff, and it was determined that some of those cuts would not be appropriate to be made. So the cuts that were appropriate to be made, expenses that could be deferred, items that could be deleted, were taken advantage of, and other cuts and other recommendations, it was felt that those could not be enacted. So that's how we arrived at the $250-some thousand in cuts. Doug?
Yes, we gave the board several options. One was, we needed $455,000 to fund the Pathway Fund. And the initial draft budget, based on discussions with the board at previous meetings last year, the initial draft budget showed that $455,000 coming out of prior year surpluses in the general fund. The board's initial review of the draft budget, they said we want to look at that closer. And they directed staff to prepare a list of options for the village board, one of which would be to achieve the $455,000 transfer to the sidewalk fund with all cuts and no using of surplus from prior years. So we provided that option, a list of some, I think 35 different options for the board. The board reviewed those options line item by line item, and I would say about half of them, the board said, no, we don't want to cut that. So we cut that 455 deficit down to 219, 215. And then the board reviewed 3 different surplus accounts that we have that we could take money from. One, as I mentioned, was the surpluses from prior year general fund budgets. The second was our IRMA, our risk liability insurance carrier, who carries reserves for us. And likewise with our health insurance provider, there's available reserves. In the end, the board decided to take the $200-some thousand out of general fund surpluses, surpluses from prior years, and that closed then the budget gap for the side, and they were able to then proceed with the County Line Road sidewalk and other sidewalk projects that are in the fiscal year budget.
Did that answer your question?
It answers my question.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Sir?
Yes, before we vote, I just wanted to, for the record, note that the date the budget was made available and the date of publication were, there was a typo in the actual ordinance in your packet. That's been corrected and the new ordinance is at the dais here. So I just want to be clear, the one you're voting on has the correct dates of March 28th.
Okay.
Very good, thank you. Any other discussion? Have a motion, please, to adopt the ordinance.
So moved.
Second. Trustee Snyder?
Yes.
Trustee McFall? Yes. Trustee Scalpa?
Yes.
Trustee Pavesa?
Yes.
Trustee Model?
No with remarks. Can I make my remarks? Thank you.
After we take the vote.
Thank you.
Trustee Francis?
Yes. Your remarks, please.
I'm voting no because I don't support the unbalanced budget. I think, a sidewalk is a need, not a necessity, not a life safety issue, and I think there were other items in the budget we could have looked at to get to a balanced budget. My feeling is the reserves and the surpluses should be invested in things that will grow our revenues for the future and not used on one-time projects that don't yield a payback to the village. And I hear the words that they were unacceptable. That's a word that you can define it how you choose. I don't think it was acceptable. I think there were other options that we could have cut to come to a balanced budget.
Thank you.
Can I just make a comment?
Yes.
Over the years, we stressed for a balanced budget. And over the years, we usually end up, something happens, and we have a surplus. And we put that surplus in account so that if we want to do something in a specific year, and it's really not in the budget, we already have a surplus, so we take money out of that surplus to do what we want to do that specific year. That's why we have so much surplus. So it's been accumulated over the years. So I really don't think it's where we're not doing a balanced budget.
Yes.
My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, the surplus has been being depleted year after year after year lately because we've been running deficits for multiple years in a row. So we're not just adding to the surplus and taking it out the next year. It has been running down on a regular basis over the last several years, and we'll continue doing that unless we find some new revenue sources.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. 6B. Mr. Walter.
6B is ordinance amending the municipal code to add a new chapter 21 entitled valet operators. This was discussed by the board at previous meetings, and we were directed to prepare this ordinance. And Assistant to the village administrator, Evan Walter, will give you the details and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Again, as our village administrator noted, this is an amendment to the municipal code, chapter 21, new chapter of the municipal code, which would add the valet operator's license to the municipal ordinance and make it a requirement that all valet operators attain a one-year license on an annual basis from the village board generally. In basic, staff was directed to prepare an ordinance which reflected an annual license for a fee of $100, as well as on a temporary basis for $25, defined as 3 days in duration or less. As I noted, the ordinance has been drafted. It is available for final approval tonight. However, we have received several comments from village businesses and property owners requesting that the board table this discussion to a future meeting. The purpose as such is to allow additional time for discussion, to determine the purpose of the ordinance, allow for greater oversight and understanding as to why the ordinance is being enacted, as well as just to give our business owners and property owners additional time to consider how this may impact their business and their operations. So with that, we're recommending that this be tabled to a future meeting, if that is your will. Thank you.
Were the business owners or residents asking for a particular timetable, or just table it indefinitely?
Just speaking for staff, we did not receive an indefinite time. I know that we have a very busy next few weeks. There is quite a bit going on with Sterigenics in the next week at least. I don't want to rush this. It was their intention that this not be rushed. So I would say this should be at least tabled until May. So again, they did not give a specific time frame, but just knowing that the internal schedule of staff is quite busy in the next 2 weeks.
Thank you, just want to understand there, thank you. So is there a motion to table?
So moved.
For a second?
Second.
Trustee Skiappa?
Yes.
Trustee Pavesa?
Yes.
Trustee Model?
No.
Trustee Matal? No. Trustee Snyder?
No.
Trustee Francis?
Yes. I vote.
I vote.
So it's not too, we'll go on
Okay,
consideration.
very good.
So at this time, I'd just like to go over a bit more of the details of the ordinance. Again, the practice here is that the board would receive all applications for valet licenses going forward, should this be established. This is not a staff decision. This would be a board decision ultimately to approve or deny licenses to valet operators in the village on an annual basis. Again, just going over what this, this ordinance would require and what it would not require. So again, the ordinance would require that all valet operations within the village be approved by the board, including those at residential properties, such as for a resident's private event. So you have a large party at your house and you want to have a valet license, you need to come to the board to get one. That's part of the ordinance. Secondly, it would be a $100 annual fee remaining in good standing to be eligible to apply and or renew their license, as well as paying $25 for a temporary license, again, 3 days or shorter in time frame. All property owners in which the valet operations take place to be involved in the permitting process, including providing authorization to conduct valet operations and to state for the record the sufficient parking exists for the valet operations to occur. So it would be involving property owners in this discussion. This would require the police department to educate their officers as to the status or locations of licenses that are active within the village, and to educate them on how to ticket them and really provide that policing mechanism that the ordinance is requiring. So again, this ordinance is requiring police departments to be aware of where valet operations exist and to issue tickets against violators. Upon issuance of a third ticket within any 12-month period, the license will be placed on a board agenda for consideration or revocation or suspension of said license. If a suspension is noted, it would be for a length of time less than 1 year, and at that time, the suspension of the license would be automatically reinstated. A revocation would prohibit the licensee from working in the village for 1 year's time. So if it came before the board elected to revoke said license, it would be a 1-year suspension automatically from working within the village. This ordinance does not require valet operators to provide a specific route upon which they will drive vehicles both to and from the valet stand. So again, this valet ordinance would establish a valet staging area, a valet parking area, so a place where you pick up and drop off cars, as well as a place where cars are parked at their final point. It would not establish a requirement to provide a routing option for the valet operators. There would be no set path they would have to follow. Once again, it would not empower staff to unilaterally approve licenses. All licenses would have to be approved by the board. Those are the majority of the highlights. Again, if there's any further questions, I'd be happy to answer those for you at this time. Thank you.
Questions? Mr. Snyder?
Haven't we discussed about a safety, having at least a set, because someone over the last year, 18 months, we've taken pictures. I'm sorry.
Let's all speak up louder, please, because of the fans and such.
I'm
Thank you.
sorry. Sorry about
Turn
that.
that fan off.
Over the last 18 months, when we've sent pictures, et cetera, we've found cars parked by the valet, where we've discussed with the restaurant owner at the time. This was basically just mainly for a safety issue, putting the cars where we've already discussed previously. Am I correct?
Yes, I know we have, we've seen those pictures before. Not all are from valet operators. However, we have had valet operators park in striped areas at County Line Square. That being said, there are already measures at County Line Square that allow the police department to do that, to operate against that without the need for a valet license per se. We put up signs that say only parking in approved spaces. We put up the signs that talk about no parking in fire. The police department, sorry again, the police department does have the authority specifically at County Line Square to write tickets against those particular violations. Now, what that does not necessarily do, does not say if the board wants to enact more stringent requirements that say we want only cars parked here in this area. We don't want cars parked at the bank or somewhere else per se. So this would be another step of oversight of the board against the valet operations that say we'd like a little bit more oversight and discretion in terms of where cars are being parked and taken at a property. Make sense?
Thank you.
Other questions? Is there a motion?
Make a motion to approve the ordinance.
Second.
Trustee Model?
Yes.
Trustee Snyder?
Yes.
Trustee Skiappa?
No.
Trustee Matal? Yes. Trustee Pabeza?
Yes.
Trustee Fenchles?
Yes.
5.
Motion passes. Considerations. Our consideration is 8A, update regarding Sterigenics in Willowbrook, Illinois.
Yes. I'd like to give you an overview, and Evan Walter's going to jump in here as well and give you some more details. Since the last meeting of the board on March 11th, at the direction of the board, we did submit a letter to the U.S. EPA acknowledging the additional testing that had been done and withdrawing our request for any additional testing. Also, the board, as directed by the staff, as directed by the board, submitted a letter to the governor thanking him for his actions relative to the closing of Sterigenics. Some bullet points, and then, as I said, Evan will get into some more detail. Assistant to the Administrator, Walter, traveled to Springfield on March 14th, testified before the Senate Environment and Conservation Committee in support of Senator John Curran's legislation that's pending in the state legislature. And on March 29th, as referenced earlier in the meeting, the Illinois Department of Public Health released their long-anticipated cancer incident study. Also, the Environmental Quality Commission will be meeting tomorrow night to discuss the pending legislation and to see if the village can offer some suggestions in that regard. And then finally, the Attorney General lawsuit against Sterigenics is scheduled to resume in DuPage County Court on April 11th. And I'd like Evan to add a little bit more detail about his testimony in Springfield, the cancer study, and tomorrow night's Environmental Quality Commission meeting.
As you stated, on March 14th, I was in Springfield. I was planning simply to read a letter into the record. However, that plan changed quickly. We very quickly established that I'd be testifying in front of the committee, so we just kind of had to roll with it there. That was a very good day in Springfield, though. We were able to meet a lot of good people who are helping not only the village of Burridge and its residents, but really anyone affected by this particular issue in both DuPage and Lake County. If you've not been aware of it, Lake County has unfortunately not had the luck we've had in terms of getting government response to assist us with this type of effort. EPA has denied all their requests for testing. They are not getting the 3-month protocol, at least at this time, that we got. We actually ended up getting about a 4.5-month testing program. But that was a good day just to simply be able to testify from a municipal perspective. I think a lot of the statewide issues sometimes don't take into account how they affect and disempower or empower municipalities. So just to be able to support people like the board and the village of Willowbrook, the city of Darien, and really all the towns around here who are making the effort to make sure this thing is dealt with in a proper way. Got to meet a lot of staffers, the people who really make things work and help with the members down there, make policy, with a number of lobbyists who want to help us. We're discussing that tomorrow night at our EQC. Just a really productive use of time, and it's always nice to see things like that work. March 29th, the IDPH did release their long-anticipated cancer incidence study. I think we've been hearing about this since like September. It's truly been a 7 or 8 month wait for this to come out. I know we had a bit of a resident comment on earlier, and I thank Mr. Morton for those introductory remarks. I follow and echo a lot of his comments. This is a good start, but we're a long way from knowing a lot of rock-solid conclusions on this particular case. Basically what they did was they took Sterigenics and they made a 15 square mile study area. We'll call it study area 1 if you can read my emails. And then they made a larger study area 2, 40 square miles, using census tracts around Sterigenics to determine cancer incidences. Now, cancer incidences we're really talking about is the number of cases that we observe. It's really just a counting exercise in their particular case. There were some statistical tests done. There's a very specific type of statistical test that they actually perform. We won't get into that. It's a bit boring, a bit lofty for tonight. But really what they found is that some diseases that we're expecting to be higher were higher. Some diseases we expected to be higher were lower. And some which were basically as expected based on county and statewide averages. Again, it's an incidence study. We can use weighted averages to get ourselves a little bit more of a little bit closer to understanding things. The weighted averages were a little bit more favorable in our assessment that cancer is more incidental in the area. Kind of a bittersweet finding. We don't like to find that there's more cancer in an area, of course, but sometimes when you have to try to establish a causal relationship with something bad, those things are necessary steps in the process. So we'll be working more to give you deeper analysis of that. I know we're going to be discussing that more deeply at our EQC meeting tomorrow. But it was about a 40-page document with about 400 extra pages beyond it that really help provide us with the deep statistical analysis that we want to do going forward. Certainly we can talk more about that if we want to, but I would like to move on. Again, the EQC meeting tomorrow night, April 9th. Main topics of discussion will be really the legislation that's before the state and the U.S. Congress at this point. We've got a number of legislation that is developing in Springfield, such as Senator Curran's 3 bills. Leader Durkin has introduced legislation, the Matt Haller bill, which would effectively prohibit ethylene oxide facilities in populated areas. The only place they would be able to go would be way out in rural areas. It basically says anything within 10 or 15 miles of a school or a park, it can't be located. Only so many areas in the state that actually can happen, if you think about a county law. So a lot of things to go over tomorrow night. We have invited quite a few number of officials from other communities. Some are attending, happy to say. We are having a representative from Tammy Duckworth's office arrive. So we're hoping to get, I think about 4 or 5 total agencies will be represented tomorrow night, including ours. So it'll be a good discussion. I certainly invite the public to come and participate in that discussion. Again, this is a community effort. These are not, none of us here are necessarily medical health professionals, public health professionals. We're all doing our best. But I'm appreciative of all the effort that we've been given so far by the community to help really make a difference on this matter. And I'm happy to say with all the things we've done, we've really kind of taken the co-lead with Willowbrook here. It's just nice to see the village in a position where we can actually actionable progress on some of these things beyond just hoping and asking and pleading for progress. We're really seeing the village take its own lead on this one. As Doug had already mentioned, the Attorney General lawsuit against Sterigenics is scheduled to resume DuPage County Court on April 11th, this coming Thursday. This is the case that they, being Sterigenics, tried to get moved to federal court, and the federal court said, no, thank you, this is going back to state court. That was a very good sign for us. That means that we now have an opportunity to join the lawsuit on a legal basis. I know Attorney Euler has prepared the complaint for us, and I've been reading that over with him. So now that we've had a successful appeal on that, we're able to get that back to state court and officially join the lawsuit, as you mentioned. I think it was January, so long wait coming, but we're able to move forward on that. Obviously, we've been talking a lot with other communities. Be a new administrator in Willowbrook very shortly next month. We're doing all we can to help them. Just get up to speed on things. It's a big transition with Administrator Hollick retiring over there. Just doing all we can, again, to just be proactive and be leaders in this particular space. So again, thank you for your support, thank you for your leadership on this. This will continue to be top of mind for staff because we know it's top of mind for the community.
Thank you, Evan. Any questions or comments from the board? Questions or comments from the residents on Sterigenics? Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Doug.
Of course.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you raise your hand?
No, I certainly could find something to talk about. I'll refrain at this time.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Very good. Thank you. 8B, update regarding the sports facility advisory town hall and stakeholders meeting.
Yes, Evan had sent email last week or two ago summarizing the town hall meetings that were held on March 21st and 20th and 21st. And he will give everyone a little bit of an update on what happened there and what happens next.
Sure. So again, we had 4 meetings with our consultant that we hired, Sports Facilities Advisory, March 21st and 22nd, actually. 4 total community meetings were held in Madras. I know a lot of you were there and attended and had the opportunity to listen and meet another guy named Evan talk about sports. Good discussions. We had a town hall meeting Thursday night, and then we had 3 stakeholder meetings on Friday here at the Village Hall. A lot of good questions were asked, and a lot of good ideas were brought up on how we can improve upon it and what we should be thinking about in terms of a risk assessment perspective. A lot of the questions came between where's it going to go, how do we pay for it, or how does someone else pay for it? What's the traffic situation look like? What will we get beyond a basketball facility? What is the Illinois Basketball Museum's role in this process? How does the village make money? How do we actually benefit beyond getting an amenity like this? And what would we actually put in it? A lot of good questions. And the reason why we have these meetings is to allow SFA to better meet the people who might use it, might benefit from it, might put money into it, et cetera, to build a better portfolio and picture of what we should actually be thinking about when this feasibility comes back in May. Really, this will be a report that comes back to the board, and the report will say, okay, tell us how you'd like to proceed on it, if at all. So we'll have to be doing a lot of thinking on that, depending on how the nature of the report comes back. But overall, SFA had mentioned to me in a follow-up email that they certainly could not recommend feasibility just based on the nature of the meeting, but thinking more about it with the deep dive meetings with staff that they've had, they certainly note that we do have a lot of the characteristics that they generally look for when they look for a strong community to do these things, such as location, population base, access to other people in the area, access to Midwest populations. That's all here. We already know that. But it's just a matter of getting all those numbers and cents boiled into a feasible document that we can use and take action on one way or the other. Again, we'll be working with them as best we can over the next few months, or weeks, I should say, and we'll be returning a document to you in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. So you do expect many of these questions to either be answered or addressed in this report that comes back to the board?
Certainly some. We'll get a cost estimate as to what it would cost to build a facility like this. Again, a number of questions were asked about traffic, certainly legitimate. How do we account for that traffic in County Line Road Light, as well as going east toward the tollway, Wolf Road? They'll give us things like how many parking spaces will we need to actually accommodate the use. Then it'll be up to us to say, is it a deck parking, is it street level parking, is it some combination thereof? That'll be up to the EDC, the Plan Commission, the board, all the bodies that we have and trust to make these decisions for us. Think about it, think about their own particular part of the decision-making process, and then return a recommendation to the board as to how to proceed. So yes, all those things will be covered in there.
Any questions for Evan?
anything like that associated with the project. On the surface, it looks great, but, like they always say, it's in the numbers, and I haven't seen anything. What's the next step?
Next step will be returning the actual feasibility study to us. We're gonna get a, as they call it, institutional grade pro forma. We can take that document and go to a bank, and that bank would recognize it as a legitimate estimation. They'd use the feasibility recommendation to decide whether to fund or not fund a loan by any particular party, not just us or a private party. There is not much we need to do between now and mid-May when we return the report. At this point, it's really just a matter of wait and see.
Any other questions? Thank you, Evan. 8C, consideration of proclamation designating April 21st through the 27th, 2019 as Arbor Day Week. Doug?
Thank you, Trustee Francis, Acting President Francis. This is normally on the consent agenda. We do this every year. We do a proclamation for Arbor Day week, and then on Arbor Day, Friday, April 26th. This year, it's always the last Friday in April. We usually go to a local school and plant a tree, have a class come out and participate in that planting. Last fall, we had decided in consultation with then Mayor Straub and some board members, we had decided that this year's Arbor Day, we would do it a little bit differently. As everyone knows, we lost our village arborist last year. Gary Gatlin passed away. It was a very devastating time for our village staff and for Gary's family. And we decided at that point that we wanted to honor Gary's contributions to the village. He was the arborist for 17 years, 2001 to 2018. Every one of those years, he led the Arbor Day tree planting at a local school. So I think I recall last year we've added up the number of trees that Gary was responsible for, and all I remember now is in the thousands in the village of Burr Ridge, as well as his contributions to maintaining the existing urban forest that that's such a critical part of this village, such an important part for this village. So our Arbor Day 2019 will be a tree planting here at the Village Hall in front of the building. It will be a ginkgo tree, which was Gary's favorite tree, and it'll be accompanied by a plaque acknowledging Gary's contributions to the village, and Gary's family has been invited. Be more specific details on the exact time coming up in the coming days. But I just wanted to take this opportunity to bring this to everyone's attention. The public is invited. Of course, trustees are invited as well. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. But otherwise, we would recommend that you approve the proclamation.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Trustee Pavesa?
Yes.
Trustee Model?
Yes.
Trustee Matal?
Yes.
Trustee Snyder?
Yes.
Trustee Skiappa?
Yes.
Trustee Francis?
Yes.
6-0.
6-0, motion passes. 8N, other considerations for announcement, deliberation, and/or discussion only. No official action will be taken. Anyone? Board members? No. Okay. 9, resident comments. Any residents would like to speak at this time? One more time, one more chance?
And again, the valet parking ordinance, as Mr. Walters was describing it, he mentioned, I think, and I'm seeking clarification, that if I was to have a private party on the private streets in Lake Ridge Club, that I would have to have a 3-day, $25 permit to have such a event. Did I hear Mr. Walters correctly say that residents would be required to have valet parking permit?
Yes, that's correct.
I personally think that's an overreach, and I wish that the board had considered a little more deliberation, because my recollection of this whole issue stems from one business in Burridge that primarily has had difficulty, not all of his own making, but due in part to the facility he's in. The second question I'd like to know, and it just occurred to me, and it's just to clear the air, there's no trustee or acting mayor that has any conflict with sterigenics or sterilization, is there?
Not that I'm aware of.
Great.
Not that any of the
Thank
board members
you.
are aware of.
Great,
If there is, I'm sure they would speak out.
thank you.
Thank you. Any other residents would like to speak at this time? Okay, reports and communications from village officials, please. Reports and communications.
Okay.
No.
Just one comment that I'd like to make. We had an election here. There was elections all over the suburbs and an election in Chicago. And as a long-term trustee, I have a lot of people talking to me and listen to the radio shows and you listen to the TV. Everybody complains. And yet, when it comes time, barely more than a third of the people come out and vote. And I think that's the sad part. As much as people usually like to complain, when it comes time to possibly make a change, especially in Chicago, they had less than 34% come out and vote. I think that's a shame.
Thank you, Alan. I'll mention something. We do receive a lot of complaints over the years about taxes. And as you recall, 2% of the property tax bill is attributed to the village of Burr Ridge.
I always used to tell Steve, make sure you put that up on the board, that it's less than 2% of
Less than
those
2%.
taxes belong to the village.
And the majority of the taxes are the biggest offender, I shouldn't say offender, the biggest taxing bodies are our schools. And yet, in the Pleasantdale District 107 School District, there were openings
On the board.
on the board and no candidates for certain positions. So I find it hard to believe that when, legitimately so, there are complaints about the taxes and the tax bills, but if you don't get out and get involved and get active, you really shouldn't be complaining. Thank you. Anything else? Non-residents' comments, please. Any non-residents would like to speak at this time? Okay, at this time, I'd like to entertain a motion to go into closed session.
So moved. Second.
We have to discuss approval of closed session meeting minutes and employment of an employee. Thank you for attending.